Welcome, dear listener, to the hush of history. Dim the lights. Turn on a fan if you'd like, and let its steady rhythm keep time with this old story. Let me know, if you will, where you're watching from tonight, and whether the sun is setting or rising beyond your window. It's strangely comforting, isn't it, knowing we're connected across continents by the quiet murmur of the past. Here, in this moment, we leave the present behind. The screen before you isn't glowing with pixels anymore, it's flickering with gaslight. The scent of damp cobblestone and chimney smoke hangs in the air. The hour is late, and the year is 1888. You are in London. Not the London of postcards and polished pageants. No, this is the other London. A city swollen with smoke and sorrow. A place where mansions gleam on the hilltops while misery festers in the alleyways below. Industry clatters on in great iron machines, while children with hollow eyes dig through soot for scraps. This city is alive, but it is not well. And somewhere, in its rotting heart, in the thick of Spitalfields and Whitechapel, a boy walks alone with bare feet and a burlap sack. His name is Jack, and tonight, he goes looking for coal, and maybe, just maybe, a way to survive. The river is low. The moon hangs in the sky like a yellow tooth, and below its pale glow, Jack descends toward the edge of the Thames, where the muck lies thick and black and cold. He moves like he's done it 100 times before, because he has. He picks his way along the slick stones with practiced steps, ankles deep in the oily sludge, the skin of his solace long since made numb to the bite of glass and rusted tin. There's no time to flinch, only time to find a lump of coal, a broken brooch, an old button, a bit of copper wire. Any one of these things could mean supper. They call boys like him mudlarks, scavengers of the riverbanks. Ragged, darting shadows at the edge of the water, always hunting, always hungry. Sometimes, in his mind, Jack imagines he's a pirate searching for buried treasure. But that dream fades fast when the wind shifts and the reek of sewage rises from the riverbed like because Jack has younger sisters who sleep on a pile of rags back in the room they all share, a room that reeks of mold and smoke and something sour that never goes away. He has a mother who boils thin broth from bones and potato peels, and a father with hollow cheeks and tired hands that once worked iron, but now shake too much to hold a hammer. Jack is the one who goes out. He is small, fast, forgettable, and when the tides are not low enough, Jack turns to the sewers. It is not a choice, not really. It is what boys like him do when the river offers nothing. He climbs down through the iron grates, torch in hand, breathing through his mouth. The walls down here sweat filth. The air is thick, choking, unnatural. He walks carefully. He listens even more carefully for the sudden, sucking roar that means the tide is coming. That sound, when it comes, gives you 30 seconds. Maybe less. 30 seconds to run or drown, but Jack does not think about that now. He watches the trickle of water winding between his feet, squints at the faint shimmer of something metal wedged in the muck. A coin, just a farthing, but better than nothing. And still he searches. This is survival. This is the labor of the invisible. Above ground, they speak of progress and prosperity, of factories and fortunes. But here, beneath the cobblestones and behind the alley doors, is another truth. A silent one, a darker one. It breathes through the city's lungs like soot. When Jack returns to the surface, his legs are streaked black, his face is pale. He is 12 years old. And he is one of the lucky ones. At least, that's what people say. At least Jack has a family. At least he has a corner to sleep in. At least he hasn't been taken by the workhouse. But what sort of luck is it, really, when your greatest blessing is a rat-infested room and lungs full of coal dust? The workhouse. Yes. It's never far from Jack's mind. He's seen the others go. Thin figures in long lines. The way the doors swallow them whole. The way they come out days later, quieter, grayer, looking like they've left something of themselves behind. They say the workhouses offer food and shelter. But what they don't say, what everyone knows anyway, is that they also take everything else: freedom, privacy, family. If Jack were to go, he'd be separated from his sisters. His mother would be stripped, searched, handed a coarse dress. His father sent to another wing, far away. They'd lose what little they had: a cracked tin cup, a scarf, the tiny wooden comb his mother uses to part his sister's hair. All gone. And for what? Gruel, stone break, endless silence. He'd rather wade through sewage. Others, like Annie Chapman, weren't so lucky. She was once a bright-eyed girl, with ribbons in her hair and a laugh that made her mother cry from happiness. But the world wore her down. First poverty, then loss, then illness. The workhouse became her refuge and her prison. She entered its doors many times in her short life. Left them with less each time. One day, she left for the last time. No one noticed when she disappeared into the shadows of Whitechapel's narrow streets. No one called her name. No one looked until it was too late, but that is a story we must walk slowly into. For now, Jack climbs the steps back into the streets. The fog is thicker. The lamps burn low. The city watches him without blinking. And in the hush of the night, as boots echo far off in a cobbled lane, a voice, quiet, cruel, is beginning to whisper through the darkness. We will return to that voice, but not yet. Not just yet. The fog has teeth tonight. It curls around the corners of buildings, slides down the narrow gaps between shutters, and settles like a secret over the sleeping streets. Lanterns flicker, their glow eaten by the mist before it reaches the ground. In these hours when the world holds its breath, London changes. It becomes something older, something watchful. Jack moves quickly through the back lanes of Whitechapel, the Knight's Hall wrapped in an old cloth and clutched tight to his chest. Coal, mostly. A rusted nail he might trade, 2 buttons. And his greatest prize, a silver spoon, bent but whole, found wedged between bricks where the gutter gave way. He doesn't stop to admire it. Not here. Not in the dark where eyes wait. There are rules in the East End, unwritten, but iron-bound. Never flash what you found. Never walk the same path home twice. And never speak to the man with the dog who whistles past midnight. Jack learned that one the hard way. His lip still bears the scar where the man's boot caught him. Not that anyone intervened. Not here. Not in this world where the strong take and the small disappear. He turns down a narrow lane, boots crunching on frost. The cold bites through his coat, thin as paper. Somewhere behind him, a bottle smashes. Laughter follows. Then silence. London keeps its peace with sudden violence. At last, he reaches the door. The wood swollen from damp. He knocks 3 times, soft, coated. A shuffle inside. Then the door creaks open just enough to show a girl's face, soot-smeared, wide-eyed. His sister. He's home. If it can be called that. The room is a box. Bare floorboards, cracked window, 3 blankets between 5 people, a fireplace long dead. His mother sits beside it, cradling a bowl of something steaming and thin. His father snores in the corner, wheezing between each breath. The other children sleep tangled together for warmth. Jack kneels and unwraps his treasures in silence. His mother's hands tremble as she sees the spoon. Her eyes well up, not with tears, but something older. Something like defeat and thanks. There's no praise, no clapping or smiles. Just a nod. Just survival. Outside, the wind howls. Inside and elsewhere in Whitechapel, in the flickering halo of a gas lamp, someone is watching. She stands alone, leaning against the cold bricks, eyes shadowed beneath a tattered bonnet. Her name is Annie Chapman. She is 31, but the years have done her no favors. Her skin is drawn tight across her cheeks. Her hands shake as she draws her shawl closer, though the wool is thin and riddled with holes. She waits, because that's what women like her do. Annie didn't start here. She wasn't born into the alleys. Once, she lived in a house with a garden. Once, she wore a white dress, walked the lanes of Windsor with a ribbon in her hair. Her husband worked with horses. They had children, laughing ones. And on Sundays, she used to sing while she scrubbed the floor. But life has a way of unraveling. First the cough came, not hers, but their daughters. Then the hospital. The bills. The long silences at the table. Her husband began to drink. Annie began to vanish. First in small ways, forgetting the bread, sleeping late, then in larger ones. By the time she found herself alone, she had forgotten how to be anything but hungry. The workhouse became her rest stop between spirals. Her body grew thinner. Her clothes, duller. Each time she came back out, she stood a little longer under the lamps. Tonight, she has no coin for a room. And so she waits, for a man, for warmth, for anything that doesn't hurt. Across the street, footsteps. She straightens, breathes through her nose. Practices the smile, but it's not a man. It's another woman. Her name is Mary. Another soul caught in the same tide. She lights a cigarette with shaking hands. Offers one to Annie. They smoke in silence. The street around them exhales. What time is it? Annie asks. Mary shrugs. Late. They say nothing more. There's a kind of kinship in shared misery, a quiet knowing that doesn't need words. Eventually, Mary drifts off toward the pub. Annie stays behind. She always stays behind. A rat scurries over her foot. She doesn't flinch. Somewhere down the lane, a door closes with a hollow thud, and in a distant part of the city, a man dips a pen in ink. He writes a letter, a strange one. It begins, "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet, but that is still days away. Tonight, Annie Chapman is just another woman in the fog. Just another silhouette beneath a flickering light. Just another ghost in the making. And Jack, he sleeps now, curled beside his sisters, his fists balled up near his face. The cold has set into his bones. He dreams of spoons and sewer rats, of rising water and long, twisting pipes. London does not sleep. It waits, because the streets are shifting, the air is changing. And soon, the East End will wake to a scream that cannot be unheard. We'll return then, but for now. Listen. Do you hear it? That slow, steady sound beneath the silence? It is the city's breath, and the sun does not rise so much as eke into the city. Gray, reluctant light bleeds through the thick fog, settling like ash across the rooftops of Whitechapel. The air is cold, damp. It tastes of coal smoke and old milk, of something metallic left too long in the rain. Somewhere, a cart wheel creaks. Somewhere else, a dog howls. But mostly, the city is quiet. Then a shriek rips through it. Sharp, human, real. It cuts across the silence like a blade. One scream, then another, then the clatter of footsteps on cobblestones. Someone calls out, hoarse and panicked, "Come quick." And suddenly the street is awake. Doors creak open. Faces appear in windows. Half-dressed figures shuffle outside, drawn like moths to something they can't yet see but already understand is bad. At the edge of Hanbury Street, a narrow yard behind a crumbling lodging house, a figure lies in the dirt. Still. Wrong. Blood darkens the stones beneath her. It pools around her throat, seeps into her dress. Her bonnet is gone. Her eyes glassy, half-lidded, stare skyward at the chimney tops. She looks surprised, or maybe just tired. It is Annie Chapman. Her name will be printed in every paper by dusk. Her story twisted, picked apart, whispered through alleyways and behind drawn curtains. But here, in this moment, she is simply a body, a woman no one saved. Jack hears about it hours later. He's sitting on the curb outside a pawn shop, holding a busted tin whistle he's hoping to trade. The shop hasn't opened yet. His fingers are numb. His stomach gnaws. Two men walk past, arguing about it. Second one this month. One says. Same as the last. Throat gone. Beast, mutters the other. Some kind of butcher. Jack listens, frowns. He knows that name. Annie. She was the one who used to hum sometimes when she waited under the lamp near the butcher's. Gave him half a bun once. Told him to run home quick before the peelers saw him. He stares at the ground, then slips the whistle back into his pocket. London is good at forgetting people like Annie. But Jack remembers. At the 10 Bells pub, the talk is loud now. The usual clink of tankards and low grumbling has turned frantic. Panic makes everything louder. Strangled first, they say, then cut. Right in the yard. Rubbish. And no one heard. Lodgers were asleep feet away. A woman's voice don't carry far in this city. The barkeep wipes the same spot on the counter over and over. One of ours, wasn't she? Someone nods. No one meets anyone's eyes. The newspapers arrive by noon, hot from the press. The Star leads with it. Horror in Hanbury Street, another murder most foul. And beneath that, in smaller print, the killer is still at large. Women urged not to walk alone. But who can afford not to walk alone? Mary, who stood beside Annie the night before, reads the headline with trembling hands. She doesn't cry. She just folds the paper carefully and tucks it under her mattress like it might keep the dark out. It won't. That night, the city holds its breath again. The fog returns, heavier this time, almost greedy. Lamps sputter. Boots echo louder than they should. There are whispers now, always whispers. Children trade stories in the alleys. Mothers grip their daughters' wrists a little tighter. And somewhere in the swirl of it all, a shape moves through the mist. Not fast, not slow. Just steady. Jack walks home that night with his eyes down. The air feels thicker. Sounds seem wrong, too close or too far, nothing in between. He passes the spot where Annie used to stand. It's empty now. Just brick and shadow and a bloodstain that won't quite wash out. He doesn't stop. Doesn't look, but he remembers. And he wonders, what would make a man do that? What kind of hunger carves a person open and walks away? No one answers. That's the worst part, not the crime. Not even the fear, but the silence that follows. In the days to come, they will call him many things. The Whitechapel monster, the knife fiend, the phantom butcher. But the name that will stick, the one that will crawl from lips like a sickness, is Jack the Ripper. A name as sharp as what it describes, but that name hasn't surfaced yet. Not quite, for now, the East End sleeps with one eye open. Every creak is a threat, every alley a warning. And the rain, when it comes, only smears the blood. Somewhere, Jack stirs in his sleep, dreaming of the sewers again, of hands reaching up from the dark, of footsteps that never echo back. He is 12. And the world is changing. Whether the nights grow longer in Whitechapel, not because the sun lingers less, but because the hours feel heavier now, drawn out like a bad breath held too long. Time moves differently when fear creeps in. It coils around the city's spires and chimneys, stretches itself down narrow lanes, slipping under doors and around ankles like smoke from an unseen fire. No one walks alone anymore. Or if they do, they walk faster, heads low, fingers wrapped tight around whatever passes for courage. The butcher's wife carries a blade in her apron now. The washerwoman keeps a brick in her pocket. Men nod to each other more often, not in greeting, but in shared unease. There is something hunting among them. And it has a taste for women. Jack hears it everywhere now, not just in whispers, but in the sounds between them. The market is quieter, the pub's louder. Every cart that creaks at night makes people look twice. Every stranger is a suspect. Even the police seem slower, their boots less certain on the stones. And then there's the flyers. They appear overnight, pasted crookedly to lamp posts and alley walls. Black ink on yellowing paper. Murderer on the loose. Women beware. The Ripper must be stopped. Jack doesn't read well, but he can sound out that word, Ripper. It cuts just to say it. He sees a man tear one down and spit on the bricks behind it. If they didn't walk the streets, the man mutters, they wouldn't end up in gutters. A woman passing by hisses at him, eyes narrowed. But she doesn't stop walking. Jack watches them both from a corner, silent, the whistle still in his coat. The city feels colder now, not just from the weather but from something deeper. Something crawling under the skin. And then, just when the panic begins to dull, it happens again. This time, September ends in blood. Elizabeth Stride is the first. They find her in Dutfield's yard, throat torn, body still warm. Some say she wasn't meant to die there, that the killer was interrupted. Others say she wasn't his at all, just a distraction. Another girl. Another grave. Barely an hour later, Catherine Eddowes is found in Mitre Square. And this time, there is no doubt. It is worse, so much worse. Her body mutilated, laid out like some cruel display. Her insides no. The newspapers won't print it, not in full. But the men who saw it won't sleep right again. The constable who found her drinks until he can't stand. The coroner weeps over his notes. The city crosses some invisible line that night. 4 women now. 4, some say 5. Maybe 6. And the letters begin to arrive. Not just to the papers, but to the police themselves. Some are obvious fakes, the work of drunkards or board clerks. But one stands out. Written in red ink, signed with a name the whole world will come to know. Jack the Ripper. It's a joke, a performance, a mask, but it sticks. Because it feels real. Because somewhere, deep down, everyone fears there truly is someone out there, watching, choosing, writing, smiling. Jack the boy hears the name and goes still. He thinks of the sewers. Of how quiet they are. Of what might move through them now. He hasn't gone down in days. His mother won't let him. She clutches his wrist when he gets too near the riverbank, her grip iron tight. Not now, she says, though she doesn't explain why. But Jack knows. It's not the water that's dangerous anymore. It's the world above. The East End becomes a pressure cooker. The fear boils, thick and sour. Protests erupt outside police stations. Women march with signs. Men throw bottles. Do something. They scream, but what? The Ripper has no face, no motive, no pattern, except that he kills the poor and disappears like steam. At night, Jack lies awake, listening to his sisters breathe beside him. The silence between their breaths feels like a countdown. And outside, the fog returns. Not soft this time, but heavy, Oli. Choking. It rolls in before dawn and doesn't lift all day. Mary, the woman who once shared a cigarette with Annie Chapman, watches it crawl through the gaps in her window frame. She wraps her coat tighter, lights another match. The flame flickers once, then dies. She's next. She doesn't know that yet, but something in her chest tells her something is coming. Jack sees her that afternoon. She's sitting by the 10 bells, smoking again, eyes on nothing. She nods as he walks past. He almost waves, but doesn't. Something about her expression makes him feel like he's already said goodbye. London feels quieter now. Not in volume, but in soul. It is a city bracing for the next scream. And when it comes, even the fog. The rain comes just after midnight. Not a storm, not yet, but a soft, relentless drizzle. The kind that turns streets into streams and paints the windows of lodging houses with thin trails of water. It taps against rooftops, whispers through alleys, settles into the skin. The East End glistens, not with beauty, but with grime. Everything shines in the dark here, the cobblestones, the gutters, the blood. Inside Miller's Court, behind a splintered green door marked 13, a woman sings to herself. Her voice is quiet and steady, a lullaby with no listener. She moves about the small, dim room, lighting a candle, straightening the blanket, adjusting the coat she's nailed over the broken window to keep the cold out. The song dies on her lips as she sinks into a wooden chair. Her body aches. Her throat is raw. This is Mary Jane Kelly. She is younger than the others. 20-5. Red-haired. Irish. And beautiful once. They say beautiful still, in a way that's hard to define. Not the powdered, polished kind of beauty the West End celebrates, but a rough, ragged loveliness like a flower growing from concrete. She hums again, softly, then stops. She is alone, but she doesn't feel alone. It's in the walls. This sense, the kind of dread that crawls beneath your thoughts, that makes your ears strain even in silence. The candle flickers. She stares at it. UNMOVING. Outside. Footsteps splash through puddles. Slow. Measured. Then nothing. The city exhales. Jack lies awake. He hasn't slept in 2 days. Not truly. Not since the last murder. He can't stop thinking about the papers, the drawings, the whispers in the market. Can't stop seeing the posters. Do you know this man? Even though there is no face, just the shape of absence. The Ripper is a shadow, a fog within the fog, and Jack. Jack can feel him everywhere now. He saw Mary earlier that evening. She passed him near the pub, wrapped in a dark shawl, eyes unreadable. She looked at him, paused and smiled. It was small, faint. And Jack doesn't know why. But it felt like a goodbye. Now, lying on the floor next to his sisters, Jack watches the rafters and listens to the rain drip from the eaves. The city creaks and groans like an old ship in the dark. He closes his eyes. In her room, Mary stirs. She rises, walks to the window, peels back the edge of the coat. Outside, just fog, just the distorted blur of gaslight. A cat shrieks somewhere far off. A man coughs in the street. The sound echoes strangely, like it doesn't belong. Then silence. There is a knock at the door. Once. Twice. Mary doesn't move. Her breath catches. She knows who it is. Not by name, not by sight. But she knows. He's here. What happens next? No one sees. No one hears, not clearly. Some say they heard a muffled cry, around 4 in the morning. Others claim there was laughter, but no one goes to check. Not in WHITCHAPL. Not anymore. The fog swallows the sound. The rain keeps falling. It isn't until nearly 11 that someone knocks again, harder this time. The landlord's assistant. He wants the rent. She hasn't paid. The door is locked. He peers through the window pane and recoils. He calls for help. Men gather. The door is forced, and the room is no longer a room. It is a place of ruin. The candle has long since died. The walls are painted red. The bed unrecognizable. Mary's body lies at the center of it all, or what's left of it. Even the seasoned constables turn away. It is not murder. It is butchery. And it is the last. For reasons no one can explain, the killings stop after Mary. Perhaps he was satisfied. Perhaps he fled. Perhaps he was never real to begin with, just a hunger the city gave a name. But Mary Jane Kelly becomes a ghost before the blood even dries. A story. A warning. A final note in a song no one wanted to hear. Jack walks past the court that afternoon. There are crowds now, reporters, curious men with eager eyes and fingers stained with ink. One man sells pamphlets, Ripper's final slaughter for a penny each. Jack doesn't stop. He doesn't speak, but his hands are shaking. And that night, as the fog finally lifts, as the rain slows, as the city dares to breathe again, Jack stands at the edge of the river. The tide is out. The mud glistens, but he doesn't go down. Not this time. He turns and walks home, the cold wind chasing him like a memory he can't escape, because something changed in Whitechapel, something broke, and though the killings have stopped, the fear remains. It always will. The fog did not take Mary away. That's what the papers said, but Jack knows better. The fog only hides things. It blurs the lines between now and never, between the living and what's left of them. But it doesn't take. No, something else took her, someone. And now that the blood is washed from the stones and the gawkers have wandered off, the city is left with the weight of it. A silence that doesn't feel like peace, more like the end of a sermon no one wanted to hear. An uneasy stillness, as if Whitechapel itself was afraid to exhale. Days pass. Then weeks. The Ripper doesn't strike again, and yet the fear doesn't leave. It changes shape. It curls under fingernails and behind tired eyes. It turns into suspicion, then anger. It festers. The police raid houses and question dozens: drunks, foreigners, butchers, lunatics. Anyone who looks like they don't belong, which, in the East End, is nearly everyone. But no answers come, just rumors, just rage, and so the people do what people always do when the truth won't come. They make it up. They invent monsters. They build them from pieces of bootprint, a broken watch, a bloodstained cuff. They draw his face on alley walls and whisper his name into their cups. Jack the Ripper, not a man now, but an idea. A myth sewn into the city's spine, a myth with Mary's blood still wet in its teeth. Jack watches this from a distance, always a distance. He sees the posters, the sketches, the pamphlets with her name misspelled and her death priced at a penny a sheet. He hears men in the pub laugh about the Ripper's pretty one. He sees boys no older than himself pretend to slash the air with sticks, mimicking the papers with wide-eyed glee. And something inside him, something small and breakable, begins to rot, because Jack knew her. Not well. Not for long, but enough to know she was real. That she smiled when she was tired, that she sang to herself when she thought no one was listening. That she once gave her last coin to a beggar older than her and said, "I'll find another." She wasn't a story, she was a person. But now she's a headline, a symbol, a cautionary tale. Jack doesn't cry, not for her. Not yet. Instead, he returns to the river. Not to scavenge, but to hide. It's quieter there now. The other mudlarks have stopped coming. Too many patrols, too many shadows. But Jack knows the banks better than they do. He slips through the breaks in the stone, climbs down to the muck where the tide recedes like a secret, and sits, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. The cold creeps in. The stink is worse than ever, but down here, the world above feels far away, like it's someone else's dream. He stares into the black water, watching it shift and glimmer. He wonders if it remembers, if the river, like him, has kept count of the dead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe more. He doesn't know all their names. Just their eyes, their silence. Sometimes, when it's quiet, Jack speaks to them. Not in full sentences, just fragments. Thoughts. Fears. He tells them about the rat that bit his sister, about the coal stove that won't light, about the man who followed him 2 nights ago but never spoke, about the constable who called his mother that Irish whore when she asked for help, and about the nightmares, the ones with knives, with blood, with a woman's voice calling from behind the wall, saying, "Don't look away, Jack, don't look away." He doesn't tell anyone else. Not the other boys. Not his mother, not the priest who offers dry bread and colder sermons. They wouldn't understand, but maybe they would. The women, the lost, the ones the world forgot. He closes his eyes and breathes in the stench, the rot, the damp. It fills his lungs like sorrow. Some days, he imagines jumping in, just to see where it goes, where the water ends. If it ends, but he never does. He always climbs back up. Always returns to the filth and noise and choking smog of the city, because someone has to remember. Someone has to carry the truth when the rest of the world insists on forgetting it. Jack walks through Whitechapel now like a ghost among ghosts. He moves through streets that still flinch at their own reflections. He sees the fear in people's eyes, but also the forgetting. The need to move on, to bury it all, but the ground won't take it, not yet. Mary's old room stands boarded up. Children dare each other to knock. Some say her ghost wanders Miller's Court, humming that same sad tune. Others say she never left the room at all. Jack doesn't believe in ghosts, but he does believe in pain, and it lingers thick and cloying in the brick, in the mud, in the breath of the city itself. The Ripper is gone, or asleep, or hiding in plain sight, but the hole he left behind is still wide open. And somewhere inside that darkness Jack waits, listening, watching, remembering, because the past doesn't die here. It waits. And when it calls again, the first frost came early that year. It crept in under door frames and gathered in windows like white breath held too long. It stiffened the sheets in the lodging houses and froze the water in the street barrels. The cold did not kill as cleanly as knives, but it was tireless, slow, relentless. It took children in their sleep and turned the elderly into statues beneath thin blankets. Whitechapel braced itself. The murders had stopped, but the chill brought its own silence. People no longer whispered about the Ripper the way they had in September. His name was still spoken, yes, but like a superstition now, not a danger. A shape in the dark, a story you told to frighten girls into staying indoors. As if that had ever saved anyone. The city wanted to move on, desperately, but grief clung like soot. It sank into the cracks of the cobblestones, into the folds of unwashed coats, into the lull between raindrops. Jack felt it like a weight behind his ribs, constant, dull, impossible to shake. He no longer played in the alleys, no longer lingered by the river. Something in him had gone quiet, not dead, just listening. And what he heard was absence. No more laughter behind the butchers, no more humming near the 10 bells. Mary's old corner had become a shrine of sorts, a pile of soggy flowers, a scrap of ribbon, a crude drawing of her face, all faded from rain. Most walked past without looking, but Jack always looked. He started drawing her, in secret, on scraps of paper, on the backs of pawn slips, in the dirt with a stick. Not the way she died, the way she lived. Eyes half laughing, hair always loose, a mouth that looked like it had one more story to tell. Sometimes he thought about showing someone, but he never did. What would they say? Why her? Why now? What good does remembering do? But Jack didn't draw to be seen. He drew so she wouldn't vanish. That winter was long and mean. The kind that made the city brittle, pipes cracked, skin split. The wind howled like something wounded, and even the dogs stopped barking. The workhouses were full. More full than ever, inside. The air was heavy with sickness and prayers no one answered. Jack's mother lined up once. Just once. They turned her away. Said she wasn't desperate enough. Said her children were still breathing. So she sold her shoes instead. Jack noticed her limp the next morning but didn't say anything. He just carried more that day. Gathered coal until his fingers bled. Stole bread. Lied about it. A month passed. Then another. The city forgot how to breathe. Then came the letter. January. Cold enough to split glass. A thick white envelope. Hand-delivered to Scotland Yard. Inside. Ink the color of dried blood. No smudgs. No smears. Written carefully. Neatly. I gave you time to rest. Now I come back. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. It could have been a prank. Probably was. But fear is a muscle. It remembers how to move. And in Whitechapel, people tensed again. The patrols doubled. The markets closed earlier. Women stopped walking alone once more. It was like breathing in reverse, lungs filling with dread. Jack felt it return, too. That quiet pressure in his chest. Like the city was leaning in, whispering again, but this time. Nothing happened. No scream, no body, no blood. Just that promise. That shadow, waiting. And beneath it all, the people began to crack. They turned on each other. The anger had nowhere else to go. An old man was dragged from his bed because someone thought he smelled like formaldehyde. A foreigner was beaten half to death after a girl said he stared too long. A doctor was hounded from his home when someone found knives in his bin. None of them were guilty. But the city didn't care. It needed to bleed something. Jack watched it unfold with eyes too old for his years. He stood in doorways and alleys, hands in his pockets, lips tight, watching the mob turn on itself, terrified and trembling and utterly helpless. He thought about Mary, what she'd say if she saw this. This is what happens when ghosts don't get buried. That's what he imagined she'd say. The frost melted eventually. The fog returned. The city softened its voice, but that winter never truly ended. Not for Jack. Not for those who had stared too long at the face of something they couldn't name. No more murders came. No more letters worth printing. But Jack knew even if the man was gone, even if the knife was buried, the wound was still open. Whitechapel would never be the same, because death had become a kind of neighbor, quiet, familiar, always watching from the next window. And Jack kept drawing. Not just Mary now, but all of them, as best he could. Not the blood. Never the blood. Just the faces. The small moments. The humanity that had been carved out of the story. He drew to remember. He drew so the silence wouldn't win. Because if no one else would carry the truth, the first sign that spring was near came not in the trees. There were no trees in Whitechapel, but in the air. A subtle shift, the kind you feel before you can name it. The wind softened. The gutters stopped freezing. Somewhere far off, a bird dared to sing. It was a quiet rebellion against the long, bruising winter. A signal that something else might be possible. That the frost didn't own the earth forever. But for Whitecape, hope is a luxury. And luxuries do not last here. Jack woke one morning to the sound of shouting. Not the usual kind, not drunkards or beatings or prayers shouted into voids. This was different, urgent, controlled. He pulled on his coat, too small for him now, and slipped into the alley. A crowd had gathered by the old brewery, not for death but for something worse, in its own way, a hanging. Not the gallows kind. Not the legal kind. Just a man, strung up by his collar from a butcher's hook. Feet barely touching the ground, eyes wide, bloodshot. Alive but only just. The mob was already dispersing. The constables never came. Jack stood back, watching as a woman spat at the man's boots. Filth, she hissed. He was bragging about her. Laughing, the her didn't need to be named. Mary. Even dead, she wasn't safe. Later, Jack saw a group of children, boys his age, maybe younger, pretending to be the Ripper. One had a stick, another lay in the mud, shrieking with laughter as fake blood, red chalk and spit smeared his shirt. A third boy called out, "I'm the real Jack, I slice better." Their mothers shouted from the windows, "Stop that, you little devils. Get in before I tan you," but the boys didn't stop. They were reenacting a myth that was now theirs. Jack didn't move, just watched until the laughter sounded like something else, like sobbing turned inside out. Until the chalk on the boy's chest reminded him too much of a drawing he'd made only the night before. That night, Jack didn't go home. Instead, he walked. Past Miller's Court, past the place where Annie had stood, past the sewer grate where he'd once climbed down with a grin and a rope. The city felt too small now. Every brick felt like a memory, every gaslight flicker a ghost. He ended up at a part of the river he didn't usually visit, south of where the mudlarks worked. Quieter, forgotten. The water there was slower, stagnant. It didn't ripple, it waited. He sat on the edge and took the tin whistle from his coat. He hadn't played it in weeks. The mouthpiece was cracked. The sound came out thin and lonely, but it was something. A shape in the silence. Jack played for the water, for the night, for them. He played until his fingers went numb. When he finally stood, the fog had begun to gather again. It rolled in low, hugging the cobblestones, making the street lamps seem distant and underwater. It reminded him of that night, her night, though he didn't want it to. But memory is not a choice. You don't summon it. It summons you. At the corner near Buck's Row, he saw her again. Not her, but a girl. Young, thin, wrapped in someone else's coat. Waiting, not for him. For life, for coin. For warmth. She looked up as he passed, met his eyes. Smiled faintly, out of habit, and Jack stopped. He reached into his coat and pulled out a drawing. One of Mary. Smudged, a little torn at the edges, but still intact. He handed it to her. The girl blinked, confused, then smiled, not faintly this time, but fully. Like someone had just handed her a piece of the sky. Jack didn't say anything. Just nodded and kept walking. There was no grand gesture in it. No promise. Just remembrance. The Ripper had taken their lives. But Jack was trying to give something back. A face, a story, a moment not written in blood. As the city slouched toward spring, the people of Whitechapel kept breathing. That was all. Not healing, not hoping, just breathing. And sometimes, that was enough. Because in the dark, under the weight of fog and silence and loss, there was still one boy carrying the memory of them all. Not in his words, but in his drawings, and in the way
the city
he
had
never
grown
looked
quieter,
but not safer. Not really. Whitechapel didn't heal, it simply adapted. like a wound that never fully closed, only crusted over, thin and red around the edges. The headlines had moved on, drifting toward politics, wars overseas, royal scandals. But here, on these streets, the name still lingered. Not always spoken aloud, but always there. Hovering. Jack the Ripper. It became a kind of password among the poor, a nod, a murmur, a reason for why things were still broken, why the nights were still dangerous, why the girls still vanished. Even when he was gone, he gave them a shape for their suffering, a shadow they could point to when no one else would listen on in that way. He never left. Jack felt this, deeply. He walked the same streets as always, but now with the sense that the pavement remembered. That each step he took echoed a little louder. The city had not forgotten, not really. It had just swallowed the story whole and buried it beneath its skin. Sometimes, Jack thought he could hear it breathing beneath his feet. He had started to draw more, not just faces now, but places, scenes, a lamplit alley, a tattered shawl on a hook, the shape of a door left slightly ajar. He drew them from memory, from dreams, from fear. But he didn't keep them. He began to leave them, tucked under floorboards in Das houses, slipped into broken mailboxes, folded into coat pockets in the market. He never signed them, never watched to see who found them. He just left pieces of the truth where the silence had grown too loud. He didn't know why, exactly. Only that he had to. One morning, he passed a wall near Hanbury Street covered in chalk messages. You once. Different from the hate scrawled after the killings. These were quiet, careful. She was more than a name. We remember Mary. For Annie, Liz, Kate, Polly. Double quotes. It was growing. A kind of mourning graffiti. A resistance made of memory. Jack stopped and added his own. She sang when she was cold. He didn't stay to watch the others read it. But he felt lighter after, that night. Back in his corner of the overcrowded room, he called home. Jack listened to his sisters sleep. Their breathing was soft. Even, he envied them that peace. Their mother was out again, looking for work, or warmth, or maybe just space. The cold had returned, not winter's bite, but spring's cruelty. The kind that teases warmth in the afternoon and yanks it away by nightfall. Jack wrapped himself tighter in the threadbare blanket and closed his eyes. That's when he heard the knock. Not at their door, but deep in his dream. A slow, hollow knock, like someone rapping at a coffin lid. It echoed 3 times. He jolted upright, gasping. Nothing. Just the dark. He lay back down, but the sound stayed with him. Not in his ears, in his chest. The next day, he learned another girl had gone missing. Not in Whitechapel, farther east. Bow, maybe. No one knew her name. No one cared. The constable shrugged. Probably ran off. They do that. But Jack knew better. It was starting again. Or never stopped. Just quieter now. Easier to ignore, because the world had moved on. But Jack hadn't. He made a new drawing that night. Not of the girl, he didn't know her face, but of a shadow. Tall, hat low. Standing at the edge of an alley with something glinting in one hand, and beside it, a figure half turned away. A girl, unnamed, almost invisible. He folded the drawing and placed it under a loose stone near Christ Church. Someone would find it. Someone had to, because the silence was growing bolder again. And Jack, the boy, not the myth, was still watching, still remembering, still refusing to let the world forget what it tried so hard to bury. The city was blooming again, but the flowers in Whitechapel were made of ash. Spring came reluctantly, as if ashamed to return to a place so heavy with ghosts. Elsewhere in London, the parks burst into green. Lovers strolled by the river. The wealthy opened their windows to let in air that smelled faintly of violets and rain. But here, in the East End, the air still smelled of soot and sour bread and the things people don't speak of. Grief doesn't follow seasons. Not here, it clings. And Jack felt it pressing against his skin more with each passing day. He saw it in the faces of women who flinched at footsteps, in the way the constables avoided eye contact with the poor, in the silence that crept in after sunset, thick and waiting. It had been months since Mary, months since that door in Miller's Court splintered open and ended something no one could name. And yet, the city still hadn't healed. Because the city never wanted to heal. It only wanted to forget. And forgetting is its own kind of violence. Jack spent more and more time away from home now. The rooms were too crowded, the nights too loud. His sisters had grown thinner, his mother, quieter. There were days she didn't speak at all, just sat by the cracked stove, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. He didn't ask. What could he say? He wandered instead, through alleys and yards. Behind the tannery, through the yards behind the breweries, down the rag and bone lanes where men shouted prices for scrap no one wanted. He carried paper now, always, tucked under his coat, pressed flat against his chest like a secret. His drawings had changed again. They'd become darker, more abstract, less face, more feeling. Less line, more shadow. One he drew entirely in charcoal, just a smudge of darkness around a girl's eyes. No mouth. No name. He left it outside the 10 bells. 2 days later, someone tacked it to the wall inside. The bartender didn't take it down. People had started to notice now, these anonymous pictures scattered through Whitechapel like offerings at a graveside. Some thought they were warnings. Others thought they were art. A few said they were sick, but everyone looked. That was enough. Jack didn't need them to understand. He just needed them to see. Because the forgetting, the swallowing of these women's lives was almost complete now. The papers no longer printed their names. The police no longer knocked on doors. The city had found new distractions. A war in Africa. A fire on Fleet Street. A scandal involving a duchess. But here, on these filthy stones, nothing had changed. The fear was still in the eyes of every girl who walked alone. Still in the sharp looks passed between men who wore knives on their belts and called it protection. Still in the silence that fell when someone disappeared and no one asked where she went. That silence had grown bold again. And Jack, then, quiet Jack with the ink-stained fingers and the whistle he hadn't played in weeks, felt it stalking the alleys once more. One afternoon, he saw a man leaning too close to a girl by the wall of a workhouse. The man's smile was wrong, his hands too fast. The girl backed away, eyes darting. Jack stepped between them. He didn't think. Just moved. The man shoved him, hard. Called him a bastard. Called the girl worse. But he left. The girl didn't say thank you. She just looked at Jack. Really looked. Then turned and walked away. That night, Jack drew her. Not with fear in her eyes, but with her chin lifted. Not proud. Not strong. Just alive. He left that drawing at the base of the chalk wall on Hanbury Street, where the names were fading now. Rain had blurred the letters. Time had eaten their edges. He retraced one with his finger. Any. Just that. He whispered it, quietly. Like a prayer. Like a rebellion. Because names mattered. Because once the names are gone, everything else follows. And he was tired of watching the world bury these women twice, once in flesh, and once in memory. Jack stood there, as the fog crept in again, softer now, but no less sure of itself. It curled around his ankles like something familiar, something old. He didn't run. He just stood, hands in his pockets, eyes wide open. Listening. Because Whitechapel was still speaking. And someone had to hear it. The fog returned like an old friend, not sudden, not loud, just there. It rolled in over the rooftops, curled between chimney stacks, sank down into the alleys like a memory long buried but not quite dead. There was no sound to it, no warning, just the slow erasure of light. Of shape, of certainty. Jack woke to it, thick outside the window. A dull gray weight pressing against the glass. He didn't speak, didn't move for a while. Just lay there, staring at the wooden beams above him, listening to the shallow rise and fall of his sister's breath. His mother was already gone, probably out looking for work or warmth or nothing at all. He pulled on his coat, the one with the patched elbows and a hidden tear under the left arm, and stepped outside. The street was quiet. Even the rats moved more carefully in fog like this. Jack walked. Not anywhere in particular. Just walked, past the broken iron fence where a flower once bloomed. Past the washwoman's stoop, past the corner where Polly had laughed once, a long, long time ago. The air was cold and tasted of soot and old meat. And somewhere in it, the silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of stillness, but of watching. As if something unseen had turned its head toward him. Not with malice, just curiosity. He ignored it. Or tried to doubt. Near the old slaughterhouse, he paused. The bloodstains had long since faded from the bricks, but Jack could still feel them like echoes beneath the surface. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded square of paper. Another drawing. This one was different. It showed no face, just a pair of boots in an alley. One turned sideways, one upright, a broken bottle nearby. A shadow stretching long across the cobblestones. It could have been anyone. That was the point. He slid the paper into the crevice of the wall under the edge of a loose brick, then turned and kept walking. A constable passed him near Buck's Row. The man didn't even glance at him. Just kept on, shoulders hunched, hands tucked deep into his coat, the way they all walked now. As if the sky might fall at any moment, and they didn't want to look up and see it coming. Jack remembered when Polly was found here. Remembered the hush that fell over the street, the way everyone walked a little slower. The way grown men muttered prayers under their breath and children were yanked indoors like wind-blown laundry. He wondered what they would have done if they'd known she'd be the first. Not the last. Would they have tried harder? Or would they have done what they always do? Whispered, looked away, carried on. Jack turned the corner and nearly collided with a woman. Thin, tired, eyes rimmed with red. She looked at him, startled. Then softened. "Excuse me, lad," she murmured, and moved past him. He wanted to say something. "Be careful. Don't walk alone." But what would that change? A street still swallowed women whole. One every few weeks, if not by blade, then by hunger, by cold, by indifference. They were still dying. Only now, no one wrote about it. No one called them victims anymore. No catchy name. No headlines. Just missing. That was worse, somehow. The quiet. Jack walked on until he reached the river. It looked the same as always, black, patient, slick with all. A slow beast at rest. He sat down on the edge and took out the whistle. It didn't work anymore. The crack had deepened. The sound it made now was thin, broken, more breath than note. But he played it anyway, not for music, for memory, because in the whistle, in the fog, in the shivering silence of the city, there were stories no one else remembered anymore. Not the kind written in papers, the kind lived, the kind lost. He played until his lips stung and the damp soaked through the seat of his trousers. And when he stood, there was a figure standing at the edge of the fog, watching him. Still. Unmoving. Jack didn't flinch. He stared back. And whoever it was, man or myth or just the shape of fear given form, it turned and vanished into the gray. Gone. Like a memory. Like a warning. Jack walked home slower that night. Because he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He'd already met the Ripper. Not the man, the city that made him. And what terrified him more than the killings was how easy began to sweat again. The cold had lifted, but with it came a different kind of weight, not the sharp bite of winter, but the sour heaviness of heat and rot. The sun didn't shine here the way it did in the parks of Kensington. It hovered instead, swollen and yellow, casting a sickly glow over everything. The alleys steamed, the gutters festered. The smell of butchered pigs from the yards mingled with the stench of open drains and unwashed skin. Summer in the East End wasn't a season. It was a sentence. Jack moved through it slowly, like a figure in a dream he couldn't wake from. His shirt stuck to his back. His feet throbbed in his too small boots. Even the flies seemed crueler now, landing, biting, dancing from corpse to bread crust to baby's cheek like they owned the place. Everyone was on edge. Fights broke out and bread lines. A man was stabbed outside the alehouse for taking someone's place in the queue. A woman threw her child into the canal and then leapt in after him. No one talked about it the next day. There were no police sketches, no headlines, just silence. Just heat. Jack stopped drawing for a while. Not because he wanted to, but because his hands wouldn't let him. They trembled now. A faint, constant tremor that made his lines jagged. He told himself it was exhaustion, or hunger, or the weight of too many nights listening for footsteps that never came. But the truth was simpler. He was tired. Tired of remembering what no one else wanted to see. Tired of trying to keep ghosts alive in a city that sold them for tuppence in the gutter. He sat one evening outside Spitalfields Market, legs crossed, chin resting on his knees. People moved past him in a haze. A man coughed blood into a handkerchief. A child stole an apple. A girl offered herself for a crust of bread and a sip of gin. Jack didn't look away anymore. He couldn't afford to, because this was where it all started. And where it was still happening. The killings hadn't returned, not in the way the papers craved. No ripped flesh, no red-soaked bedsheets, no 5-penny pamphlets sold on corners. But the women were still dying. Quiet deaths, slow ones. Forgotten ones. The kind no one investigates because there's no spectacle in starvation. And yet Jack noticed. He counted. He carved notches in the edge of a wooden beam behind the butcher's. One for every woman gone this season. 13, so far. Not all dead. Not confirmed. But vanished. Vanished in a city where girls vanished every day, into smoke, into river mist, into the belly of whatever beast crawled beneath these cobblestones. And one night, As the air pressed down like a wet cloth and the gaslights flickered with flies, Jack saw her, a girl no older than he was, standing near the corner where Mary used to smile. Her face was pale, her dress wrinkled and thin, her shoes missing. But her eyes were what caught him. They were too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after screaming. She was waiting for someone. Not a customer, not a friend, just someone. Jack crossed the street, slowly. He didn't know why. She didn't speak. Just watched him come closer, not afraid, not hopeful, just tired. He offered her half of his bread. She took it without a word. They sat together on the steps of an old boarding house, chewing in silence. Jack finally asked her name. She said nothing, just leaned her head against the brick wall and closed her eyes. And in that moment, with the city groaning all around them, and the night pressing like a bruise, Jack realized something. She didn't want to be remembered. She didn't want to be a drawing on a wall. She didn't want to be a name. She just wanted to be invisible. And Jack, who had spent the last year trying to make the world remember, suddenly wondered if he was wrong. What if remembrance wasn't a kindness? What if digging up ghosts only made it harder for the living to go on? What if silence was a mercy? But then he looked down at his hands, the fingers that had traced Mary's smile, that had redrawn Annie's shawl a dozen times to get the folds just right, that had shaded the broken glass by Kate's feet with more care than anyone had ever given her in life. And he knew it wasn't about kindness, it was about truth. And truth is never silent. He stood, pulled a scrap of charcoal from his pocket, found a bare patch of wall and began to draw. Not her face, just her shoes, her bare feet. The way she curled slightly inward, like something trying to hide from the world. When he finished, he left without a word. The city kept on breathing behind him. Heavy, slow, like something waiting to be woken. The nights were long again, not in hours, but in weight. Each one fell like a curtain across the city, not soft, but heavy, drenched in soot, dragging behind it a silence that felt sharpened at the edges, as though it might cut you if you breathed too loudly. Whitechapel wasn't sleeping anymore. It was enduring. Jack felt it in his chest each time the gaslights flickered to life, when the shadows stretched too far and the corners of buildings began to look like mouths. He walked slower after dusk now, not from fear, but from a kind of grim respect, as though every alley had become a grave and he didn't want to disturb the bones. The Ripper hadn't returned, but neither had the city. It was stuck, caught in the scar tissue of its own story. The kind of wound that never heals because the knife never really left. And then, one morning, something shifted. A new name, a girl found near the docks. No coat, no shoes. Bruised, half submerged in water like a rag someone forgot to wring out. No paper carried the story. No constables knocked doors. She was too poor, too ordinary, too expected. Jack heard it in whispers. A boy mentioned it while kicking a stone. A laundress spat it out like something bitter. A priest crossed himself and muttered, "Lord, another. Another." That was all she was now. Not even a person. Just a tick on some invisible tally. Jack stood at the edge of the market, hands in his pockets, watching as people hurried past the place where her body had been, not avoiding it, just stepping around it, like any other stain on the street. He looked down and saw her face in his mind, not because he knew her, he didn't, but because he could. He had seen it too many times. The hollow eyes, the cracked lips, the quiet. That quiet that came not from death, but from the moment before it, when someone realized no one was coming to stop it. Jack couldn't walk past, not this time. He knelt in the dirt and drew a small shape on the brick beside the gutter. A boat, no larger than a child's hand, folded from paper, floating on inked ripples. And in the boat, a girl curled like a comma, silent, carried by the tide. He left it unsigned. That afternoon, he heard two boys arguing about the picture. "It's just a scribble," one said, "doesn't mean nothin'." The other shook his head. "It's her, that girl from the water." Saw the eyes. Jack didn't speak, just watched them go. Later that night, he passed by again and saw that someone had placed a daisy beneath the drawing. It was wilted, but still white, still reaching. The next day brought thunder. The sky split open without warning, and the rain came in thick, warm sheets, washing the streets clean of ash and filth, or trying to. Jack walked through it, soaked through in minutes, not caring. His hair clung to his forehead, his boots filled with water. The city around him steamed like something trying to escape its own skin. He passed by the workhouse gates. A woman sat under the eaves, her knees pulled to her chest, lips blue. No one stopped. Jack did. He handed her the only coin he had. She didn't thank him, just gripped it tightly, as though it might melt if she let go. He didn't wait. He turned and walked toward Mitre Square. It was empty now, just whetstones and the ghosts of headlines. But Jack remembered Catherine Eddowes, her blood still etched in the cracks, if not in color, then in memory. He sat on the cold stone where she might have stood, pulled a fresh sheet of paper from his coat, and drew her boot. Just one, half unlaced, sitting by itself beside a puddle that reflected nothing. He didn't need to draw the rest. He already had 100 times. The sky began to darken again, as if the city hadn't quite finished crying. Jack stood, folded the drawing, placed it inside the old rusted gate at the square's edge, and walked away. That night, he found himself whispering again. Not prayers, not names, just promises. Promises he had no power to keep. I won't let you disappear. I won't let them forget. I saw you. The words disappeared into the wind, but he said them anyway, because sometimes that's all that's left. The city exhaled, but it was not relief. It was resignation. Late summer pressed its weight down on London like a hand on the throat. The heat was thick with coal dust and sour milk and the rot of 1,000 forgotten things. The streets of Whitechapel shimmered not with light, but with fatigue. The kind that sets into bone, the kind that teaches you how to survive without ever knowing peace. And yet, somehow, life kept going. Markets bustled. Children ran barefoot through sewage. Women hawked stale bread from baskets lined with newspaper. Men drank too early and too often. Somewhere, a violin sang above the cries of a baby who would not be soothed. The world didn't stop when the girls disappeared. It just swallowed the silence and carried on. Jack felt the weight of that every day. It was in the way people looked past him, through him, around him. As if he, too, might vanish if they didn't stare too long. As if to see the boy who remembered was to remember themselves, and no one wanted that. He understood now that memory was dangerous. More dangerous than a knife, because memory demands action. Demands grief, demands you feel something. And most people in Whitechapel had learned to stop feeling years ago. Jack hadn't. He carried their faces like scars under his ribs, woke with them, walked with them. Drew them again and again until the lines blurred from repetition. He knew them better than he knew his own. Not just the 5. All of them. The unnamed girl in Bow. The woman in rags behind the tannery. The child no one claimed from the canal. He drew them, too, and one by one, he started leaving those drawings not in corners or cracks, but in light, pinned to windows, folded on public benches, slipped into the hands of those too tired to care. A new one appeared each day. Some people tore them down. Others stared. Some kept them. One ended up framed behind the counter at a pawnshop near Dorset Street. The owner never said why. But Jack saw at once, through the dirty glass, the girl in the boat, the one with the paper wings, still there, still floating, and somehow, that was enough. But not for everyone. The constables came looking for him, not because of the drawings, not directly, but because silence makes men suspicious, and boys who watch too much are never trusted long. They didn't say much, just followed, asked questions. Where did he sleep? Where was his mother? Why was he always there? Jack never answered, because he didn't know how to say the truth. Didn't know how to say, I'm still looking for her, all of them, even if no one else is. One evening, just before the lamps lit, he saw something strange. A man, well-dressed, taller than most, standing in the exact spot where Annie Chapman had died. Not kneeling, not weeping, just standing, staring at the wall. Then he turned and walked away. No one else noticed, but Jack did, because grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just lingers. That night, Jack returned to the same spot. There was something new on the wall, not a drawing, just words, etched carefully with the tip of a nail into the brick. I remember her laugh. No signature, no initials, just that. Jack stared at it for a long time. And in that moment, he realized something. He wasn't alone. Others remembered, quietly, secretly, shamefully, maybe, but still. He smiled. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. And then he pulled a piece of charcoal from his coat, and below those words, he added, I remember her hands. It felt like a conversation, a eulogy spoken in pieces, across bricks and nights. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. The city would forget again. He knew that. It would paint over the names. It would silence the stories. It would bury the truth with new distractions, louder noise, shinier lies. But for now, for this moment, they had spoken. The dead had been heard, and the boy who remembered them was no longer just a boy. He was a witness. and that was enough to keep going. The first leaves began to fall, though the trees had hardly turned. It was early still, just the soft edge of autumn, brushing its fingers along the city's spine. But in Whitechapel, even the changing of seasons felt like a warning. The light thinned, the nights came sooner. The wind carried a sharper scent, iron, smoke, the beginnings of rot. Jack welcomed it. He was tired of summer's lies, the illusion of warmth, the smell of spoiled hope. Autumn was honest. It peeled things back, exposed what had been hidden beneath heat and noise and laughter that never reached the eyes. He had grown quieter with the turning leaves, not sad, not afraid, just old, not in years, in knowing. Knowing what people look like when they stop hoping. Knowing how silence doesn't mean peace. Knowing how the city forgets with its eyes open. Jack no longer bothered trying to convince anyone. He didn't shout, didn't accuse. He just walked, drew, listened. The city still spoke, if only in fragments. The scrape of boots near Mitre Square. The hush that fell when a name was mentioned too loudly. The sudden closing of shutters when a girl walked past alone. Whitechapel was still bleeding, just more quietly now. And yet something strange had begun to happen. People were leaving drawings behind. Not many. Crude ones, simple ones, a figure in a shawl. A set of shoes, a name, scratched into stone. Most weren't skilled, but they didn't need to be. They were witnesses, just like Jack. He saw one outside the old pub, a small chalk sketch of a woman's face, not quite finished. Beside it, someone had written. Her name was Polly. She mattered. He traced the words with his finger, gently. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel alone. The fog returned, not heavy, just enough to blur the lamps. Jack followed it, not to any particular place, just where the city pulled him. Past the grocer with the shattered window. Past the alley where someone had scrawled "We see you" on the wall in charcoal. Past the corner where a girl sat singing softly to no one, her voice too sweet for a place like this. He stopped when he reached Miller's Court. It was mostly abandoned now. The room boarded up, the stories grown tired. But Jack remembered. He remembered the door. He remembered how it splintered. He remembered the lies they told about her, and the way she laughed anyway. The way her hair always smelled faintly of mint, though no one ever believed him. He stood there for a long time. Then he took out a sheet of paper. This one was different. It was the last one he had, and he had saved it. Not for a face, not for a moment, but for a truth. He drew the door. Just the door. Closed. Intact. Whole. Not broken. Not bloodstained. Not legendary. Just hers. He pinned it to the wood with a small tack and turned away before anyone could see. Let them wonder. Let them find it and not understand. That was all right. He hadn't drawn it for them. He'd drawn it for her. As he walked back through the fog, a girl passed him, thin, hollow-eyed, just like all the others. But this time, something different. She was holding a drawing. His drawing. The one with the boat. She clutched it like a lifeline. Did she know it was his? Did it matter? Jack met her eyes, just briefly. She nodded. And in that single motion, that small, silent gesture, something passed between them. Not thanks, not recognition, just understanding. Jack walked on, his boots damp, the fog rising again like breath from a dying throat. And somewhere behind him, the city exhaled, not in peace, but in witness. The nights were colder now, not the brutal cold of winter, not yet, but the kind that slips beneath your collar and settles behind your ribs. The kind that reminds you what's coming. Whitechapel braced itself. The lamps flickered earlier. The shadows came faster. The silence thickened. There were fewer girls on the corners now, and those who stayed out past dusk wore their fear like another layer of clothing. You could see it in the way they looked over their shoulders. The way they clutched coins in their palms. The way they didn't run, not because they weren't scared, but because running was a luxury. Jack watched them all, not with pity, with reverence. Each one still here was a miracle. He spent more time alone now. Even the boys who once played in the alleys had grown quiet, their game subdued. The Ripper had become a ghost story again, one parents whispered to frighten restless children, one drunks mumbled in slurred boasts, pretending to be the killer himself. But Jack remembered what it had cost, and what it still cost, because though the papers had stopped writing, the dying hadn't. Just 2 weeks ago, a girl named Elsie had vanished. No fuss, no crowds, just gone. Jack knew her. A little. She used to sing near the pump yard, voice barely above a hum. She had a strange, lovely laugh, like a bell with a crack in it. Now she was gone, and no one had said her name since. He drew her that night, not how she looked when she vanished, but how she should have been, head high, hair wild, hands outstretched toward the sky, like she could catch stars if someone gave her the chance. He folded the drawing and slid it into the crevice under the baker's stair. He didn't wait. He never did. The next morning, it was gone. Not torn, not burned, just gone. Someone had taken her. Someone had remembered. That was enough. Jack had stopped signing his drawings long ago. He wasn't doing this to be seen. He was doing this so they could be. And yet, people were starting to talk. Softly, carefully. They called him the ghost artist, or the watcher. Some said he was the Ripper's brother. Others said he was a spirit, a boy who died long ago and haunted the East End with pictures of the dead. He didn't care. Let them guess. Let them wonder. As long as they looked. Because for every lie the city told itself, he told the truth. One drawing at a time. One girl at a time. And now, something new was stirring. He felt it. A tension in the alleys. A change in the wind. It wasn't fear. It was anger. Not the loud, burning kind, but the quiet, heavy sort that settles in the bones. He saw it in the way people looked at the constables. The way women gripped their shawls tighter when men passed too close. The way children stopped playing and started watching. The silence was beginning to crack. Not in words, in acts. More drawings appeared. Words scratched into stone. Candles left burning in places where women had last been seen. Jack passed by the old brewery and saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A mural. Not large, not detailed, but unmistakable. 5 women, hand in hand, faces lifted. Someone had written beneath it. We carried their names. He stood there for a long time. Let the words settle. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a drawing he'd been holding for weeks. It was of Mary, but not as she died, as she lived. Laughter in her mouth, a flower tucked behind one ear. One eye squinting, like she was in on a joke you'd never understand. He pinned it to the wall beside the mural. And for the first time, he signed it. Not his name, just a single letter, J. And then he stepped back. The wind shifted. The fog stirred. Somewhere far off, the bells of Spitalfields tolled, not for the dead, but for the living who refused to forget them. Jack turned his face to the sound, and kept walking, not as a child, not anymore, but as something else, something becoming. The fog was thicker than ever. It clung to the cobbles like grief, rolled through the alleys with the slow certainty of time. The gaslights were faint halos now, their glow swallowed into the mist as quickly as it came. Every sound was muffled, footsteps, distant horses, the low creak of shutters swinging in the wind. The city felt like a cathedral of ghosts, and Jack walked through it with reverence. This would be his last. Not his death, no, but something just as final. Something even more frightening, letting go. He had known it was coming, had felt it in his hands. In the way the paper no longer drank the ink the same way. In the way his heart beat slower each time he folded up a new drawing. The act had changed. It had always been sacred, a ritual against forgetting. But now it felt like farewell. He was 17. Maybe. He didn't know the day he was born. Time had never belonged to him. But he felt older. The city had aged him. The deaths had shaped him. And the silence. It had carved him hollow, like wood holding a flame. He no longer needed to prove what he'd seen. The faces were with him always. Not just the 5 the papers named Polly, Annie, Liz, Kate, Mary, but the others. The quiet girls, the girls without headlines. Without mourners, the ones buried in shadow. They had become his voice. Tonight, he returned to where it all began. Bucks Row. Polly Nichols, the woman who didn't scream. The woman the man laughed at for being too drunk to know she was dying. The woman whose death had launched 100 lies, and whose name still lingered in the brick like blood that never washed out. Jack knelt beside the wall. He pulled out his last sheet of paper. The rain had started again, soft and slow, like a breath over skin. It would smear the ink if he didn't hurry, but he didn't. This drawing was simple, a circle. Within it 5 smaller circles, linked, holding one another like stars too faint to be seen, unless you knew where to look. No faces, no names, just presence. He folded the page and tucked it into the crack beside the cobble where he'd once seen her blood. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out the broken whistle. The one that had never played right. He placed it next to the drawing. A gift, a relic. Let the city bury it, if it must. He stood. The fog moved like breath around him. London exhaled. And for the first time, it sounded like a sigh of peace. As he turned, he saw them not clearly, not fully. But in the mist, in the lamplight, They were there. Silhouettes. 5 of them. Walking together. No blood, no fear. Just figures. Free. Jack didn't call out. He didn't follow. He just watched them disappear into the white. And then, quietly, he did the same. The drawings would remain. So would the names. The truth had been spoken, softly but relentlessly, until the silence cracked wide enough to let the light in. And somewhere in that cracked silence, Jack, the boy who remembered, the boy who watched, the boy who refused to let them be forgotten, finally vanished from the city that had made him, but not from the story. Dim the lights now. Let the last embers of the story settle around you like ash. You've walked the foggy alleys with us, heard the footsteps, felt the weight of names whispered too softly for too long. If this journey stirred something in you, a memory, a question, a silence, share it in the comments. Let us know where in the world you're listening from, and who you carried with you through this tale. And if these quiet voices from the past brought you closer to something forgotten, subscribe. Not for us, but for them. The ones history tried to bury, the ones still waiting to be seen. There are more stories like this, ones lost in the cracks, buried in dust, waiting to be whispered back into the world. Until then, keep your lantern lit, walk gently, and remember, not all ghosts haunt. Some guide. Good night.